Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. The three suns of Kadra burned mercilessly in the violet-black sky, their overlapping light creating unusual shadows across the endless dunes. Heat waves distorted the horizon, making the barren landscape shimmer like a hallucination. In this uninhabitable wasteland, with no sign of life for 1,000 miles, Princess Amrelice counted what she expected to be her final breaths. Buried up to her neck in scalding sand, she'd stopped struggling hours ago. The automated drone judge had carried out its sentence with mechanical precision, a public execution without an audience. Her crime, rebellion against her civilization's ancient marriage system. Her punishment, abandonment in the deadliest region of the planet. The heat baked her exposed violet skin, cracking her lips despite the moisture-preserving biology of her species. The metal collar around her neck, designed to suppress her telepathic abilities, dug into her flesh, its control panel blinking lazily in the punishing heat. Amra blinked away sweat from her luminous golden eyes and watched as the smallest sun began its descent. "At least I'll die with principles intact," she muttered to herself, her melodic voice rough from dehydration. A sudden gust of wind sent painful grains of sand against her face. She closed her eyes against the onslaught, having long since lost the strength to turn her head. When she opened them again, something impossible appeared on the horizon, a figure, two-legged and upright, walking directly toward her through heat waves that should have killed any living creature. Amra blinked hard. Desert mirages had tormented her for hours, showing water, shade, rescue, all cruel fabrications of a dying mind. But this mirage didn't shimmer or distort. It moved with purpose, growing larger as it approached. "Excellent," she said bitterly. "Hallucinations, the final stage." The figure resolved into a man, surprisingly human-looking, wearing a black jacket despite the blistering heat, tousled dark hair, several days' stubble, and a walk that suggested both confidence and complete disinterest in his surroundings. He carried nothing but what appeared to be a metal canteen and some kind of scanning device. He stopped 10 feet from her, pushed reflective goggles up onto his forehead and revealed eyes of startling clarity, steel blue with flecks of gray. He tilted his head, studying her as if finding a head protruding from desert sand was a mild curiosity rather than a shock. "Well," his voice was deep, roughened by the dry air. "That's not something you see every day." Amra stared back, unable to decide if he was real or a particularly detailed hallucination. "Are you actually here, or have I finally lost my mind completely?" "Both possibilities seem equally likely," he replied, crouching down to her eye level. "Though I'm pretty sure I'm real. Ray Archer. Human. Not from around here, obviously." Human, Amra tested the word. She'd heard of humans, a species from the distant edge of the galaxy, primitive but resourceful. They weren't known to venture this far into Imperial space. "What are you doing on Kadra? This planet is uninhabitable." "Searching for a drill part I lost during the last sandstorm." Ray pulled out his canteen, unscrewed the cap, and offered it to her lips. "Uninhabitable is subjective." The water touched her cracked lips, cold, real water, not a hallucination. Relief flooded her system as she drank carefully. "Easy," he cautioned, pulling the canteen away. "Too much at once will make you sick." Amra licked her lips, savoring the moisture. "And what do your Earth laws say about buried princesses? Do you kiss them, save them, or ignore them?" A hint of amusement crossed his face. "Depends on the bust size." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "Kidding, though." "Very funny," she retorted, her golden eyes flashing. "I'm sure your species' humor is as evolved as your fashion sense. That jacket must be comfortable in triple-digit heat." "Temperature regulation tech," Ray replied, tapping the worn leather. "And I'd be careful with the attitude. Not many passers-by in these parts. He circled around her, examining the extent of her burial. The sand had been compacted and hardened almost like concrete around her body. Impressive trap. Someone really wanted to make a point. An automated drone judge, very thorough with punishments. Amra tried to maintain her dignity despite her position. Are you going to help me or just admire their handiwork? Ray pulled a multi-tool from his pocket and began testing the hardened sand. I'm considering my options. Helping strange women buried in deadly deserts hasn't typically ended well for me. And how often does that specific scenario arise in your life? More than you'd think. He started digging carefully around her shoulders. Who exactly are you, and what did you do to deserve this architectural marvel of punishment? Amra hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. I'm Amra. I disagreed with certain cultural traditions. My people don't appreciate dissent. Clearly. Ray's fingers brushed against the metal collar. And this fashion accessory. She tensed. A security measure. Against what? Me. Ray paused his digging, studying her face closely. Interesting. He continued working, methodically breaking apart the hardened sand with surprising efficiency. Most people buried in deserts tend to be dangerous. Are you dangerous, Amra? Only to oppressive systems and men who ask too many questions, she replied with a sharp smile that revealed slightly pointed canines. He laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise even him. Fair enough. As the sky darkened to deep indigo, Ray worked steadily, breaking through the hardened crust layer by layer. The temperature dropped rapidly as it always did on Kedra, the harsh heat giving way to bone-chilling cold. You're not very talkative for someone being rescued, Ray observed, having freed her shoulders and upper chest. I'm conserving energy, Amra replied. In truth, she was studying him, trying to understand his motives. No one did anything without reason in her experience, especially not crossing a deadly desert to help a stranger. Why are you really here, human? Ray didn't look up from his work. Told you, lost a drill part. In the exact location of my execution, the probability seems low, I know. He shrugged. Maybe the universe has a weird sense of humor, or maybe your execution site happens to be near where my equipment got tossed in the last storm. Choose whichever explanation you prefer. Another hour passed before Ray finally broke through enough of the hardened sand to give Amra leverage to pull herself free. Her limbs, stiff from immobility, failed her on the first attempt to stand. She collapsed against him, her body unexpectedly pressed to his. Ray steadied her with surprising strength for his frame. Easy there, princess. Amra pulled away as soon as her legs would support her, self-consciously adjusting the tattered remains of what had once been royal attire. Her violet skin, normally luminous, was burned and abraded from the sand. I need to get this collar off, she said, fingers tracing the metal band. About that. Ray folded his arms. Maybe we should discuss what it's for first. Amra's golden eyes narrowed. It's a control device. It suppresses certain abilities. What kind of abilities make someone nervous enough to put a collar on you before burying you in the desert? She considered lying, but opted for a partial truth. Telepathic ones. My species can connect with others mentally, read surface thoughts, communicate silently. And they worried you'd, what, telepathically signal for help from under the sand? Ray's skepticism was evident. No. Amra looked toward the now dark horizon. They worried I'd influence the drone judge's programming. It's partly organic. Ray whistled low. So you're powerful enough that they're afraid you could mind control their execution robots. That's not reassuring for your new traveling companion. Would you prefer I'd stayed buried? I'm just saying a little transparency might be nice. He glanced at his wrist device, which displayed a holographic map. Nearest settlement is about 30 miles southeast. My shelter's 10 miles northwest. Your call. Amra studied the map, recognizing nothing. She'd been unconscious when transported to this execution site. The settlement. I need to contact someone. Suit yourself. Ray shrugged, then hesitated. But fair warning, if you're a fugitive, settlements have surveillance, and that collar's probably broadcasting your location. Amra's hand flew to the metal band, her expression changing. You're right. I hadn't considered. She stopped, realizing she'd revealed too much. Ray's eyes narrowed. So you are running from someone, important enough for tracking technology. I'm not a criminal, she stated flatly. Never said you were, but clearly you're someone of interest. He tapped the map closed. My shelter it is. We can figure out how to disable that tracker, then decide next steps. The temperature continued to plummet as they walked across the dunes. Kedra's extreme temperature variations, scorching days and freezing nights, were part of what made it uninhabitable. Amra, weakened from her ordeal and dressed in thin, torn garments, began to shiver violently. Ray noticed immediately. Without comment, he removed his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. But your temperature regulation, she protested, has backup systems, he finished. I'll survive. The jacket enveloped her in unexpected warmth and carried his scent, a strange mixture of something burnt, machine oil, and something distinctly alien to her senses. Human smell, she realized, not unpleasant. Thank you, she said quietly, the words feeling foreign on her tongue. Gratitude wasn't commonly expressed in Imperial culture. Ray merely nodded, his attention on the scanner in his hand. We need to pick up the pace, sandstorm forming to the west. They trudged through the increasingly cold night, the 3 moons of Kedra casting eerie, overlapping shadows across the desert landscape. Amra studied Ray's profile in the moonlight. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to harsh environments, but there was something else, a precision to his movements that seemed at odds with his casual demeanor. What brought a human to Kedra? She asked finally. It's far from your normal trade routes. Resource prospecting, he answered without turning. The planet's uninhabitable but mineral-rich. Companies pay well for survey work. Alone? I prefer it that way. Most humans don't. Ray glanced at her. You know many humans? I've studied your species. This was true. As a royal, Amra had been educated about all known sentient species. You're social creatures, typically operating in groups. Well, I'm atypical. The abrupt end to his response indicated he considered the subject closed. Amra noted the boundary but filed away her observations. This human was hiding something beyond normal privacy concerns. By the time they reached Ray's shelter, a reinforced structure half buried in the side of a dune, Amra was exhausted. The shelter door slid open at Ray's touch, revealing a surprisingly well-equipped interior. Compact but efficient, with tech that seemed more advanced than standard human equipment. Not what I expected from a simple prospector, Amra observed as she entered. Ray secured the door behind them. I invest in comfort. He moved to a storage unit and pulled out emergency rations and water. Eat. Rest. We'll deal with that collar in the morning. Amra accepted the food but remained standing, studying the shelter's layout. Where did you learn to disable Imperial security tech? Ray paused, his back to her. Who said I knew how? Your confidence in offering suggests experience. She took a step closer. And this shelter has shielding that blocked my collar's transmission the moment we entered. That's not standard equipment for a mineral prospector. He turned slowly, his expression carefully neutral. You seem to know a lot about standard equipment. And you seem to be more than you claim. The small space between them charged with tension. Ray held her gaze for a long moment before a smile, small but genuine, broke through. Looks like we're both keeping secrets, Princess. Get some rest. Whatever you're running from, whatever I'm hiding, it can wait until morning." Exhaustion finally won over suspicion. Amra settled onto the cot, still wrapped in Ray's jacket. The last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Ray checking security monitors, his profile illuminated by their blue glow, the set of his shoulders suggesting a man far more acquainted with danger than any ordinary prospector should be. Outside, the winds of Kedra howled as the predicted sandstorm arrived, burying all traces of their passage across the desert. By morning, it would be as if they had never existed. A fitting metaphor, Amra thought, as consciousness slipped away, for two people who had already disappeared from their respective worlds. The temperature in Ray's shelter plummeted as Kedra's triple moons reached their zenith. Even with environmental controls, the desert night sent icy tendrils through the reinforced walls. Amra woke with a violent shiver, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. The cot, positioned near an outer wall, had become a cold slab despite the thermal blanket. She sat up, wrapping Ray's jacket tighter around her shoulders. Across the small space, Ray worked at a console, his face illuminated by holographic displays showing thermal scans of the surrounding desert. "Can't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Your hospitality needs improvement," Amra replied, her voice trembling slightly. "Is freezing your guests standard human protocol?" Ray glanced over his shoulder, the blue light casting sharp shadows across his face. "Power conservation. We're running on auxiliary systems to minimize detection signatures." Amra stood, wincing as her bare feet touched the freezing floor. She moved closer to Ray's workstation, drawn to both the relative warmth of the equipment and the curious data displays. "What are you tracking?" "Heat signatures, movement patterns." He gestured toward a flickering orange cluster several miles distant. "Sand beetles. They travel in swarms this time of year. Good news is they're moving away from us." Amra leaned closer, studying the display. "And the bad news? They're running from something." He highlighted another signature, larger, faster, with a distinctive pattern. "That's an Imperial scout ship, low-altitude sweep pattern." "They're looking for me." It wasn't a question. "Seems likely." Ray's fingers danced across the controls, adjusting scanning parameters. "They're thorough. Thermal imaging, signal tracking, ground-penetrating radar." Amra's hand went to the collar still securely fastened around her neck. "How long before they find us?" "They won't. Not tonight." He indicated the shelter schematics on another display. "This place is shielded, thermally, electromagnetically, seismically. We're effectively invisible." She studied his profile in the blue light. "You've done this before." "Done what?" "Hidden. From authorities." Ray's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Let's just say I value my privacy." Another violent shiver racked Amra's body. Ray finally turned fully toward her, taking in her condition with a critical eye. "Your biology isn't adapted for cold," he observed. "My species evolved on a planet with stable temperatures," she admitted. "We don't thermoregulate effectively in extremes." Without further comment, Ray stood and moved to adjust the environmental controls. "I can divert more power to heating, but it'll take time to warm up. In the meantime," he hesitated, an uncharacteristic uncertainty crossing his features. "In the meantime?" Amra prompted. Ray sighed. "Body heat is the most efficient solution. The sleeping platform expands." Amra raised an eyebrow, her golden eyes glinting in the dim light. "Are you inviting me to your bed, human?" "I'm offering a practical solution to a medical problem," Ray countered, though a slight flush colored his neck. "Hypothermia isn't romantic." Amra laughed, a melodic sound that seemed to surprise Ray. "Always so practical. Do all humans disguise their desires as logistics?" "I'm not—" Ray stopped, frustration evident. "Fine. Freeze if you prefer." He returned to his console, shoulders tense. Amra watched him for a moment, then moved beside him. "Your offer is accepted," she said quietly. "For survival purposes only, of course." Ray's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps. "Of course." The sleeping platform expanded with mechanical precision, doubling in width. Ray stripped the system down to standby mode and joined Amra. They arranged themselves awkwardly at first, maintaining a careful few inches between their bodies under the thermal blanket. Minutes passed in silence. Amra's shivering continued. "This isn't working," Ray finally muttered. "Proximity without contact defeats the purpose." Before Amra could respond, he shifted closer and slipped an arm beneath her, pulling her against his chest in one fluid motion. Her body tensed at the sudden contact, then gradually relaxed as his warmth enveloped her. "Better?" he asked, his voice low near her ear. Amra nodded, acutely aware of every point where their bodies connected. His heartbeat, faster than her species, pulsed against her back. His scent surrounded her, strangely comforting now. "Your skin," Ray observed quietly. "It's bioluminescent." In the darkness, the intricate patterns across Amra's violet skin had begun to emit a soft, ethereal glow, a biological response she couldn't control. "It's a natural response to certain stimuli," she explained, grateful that the dim light concealed her embarrassment. "Temperature?" "Among other things." Ray's hand moved cautiously to her arm, fingers tracing one of the glowing patterns. Where he touched, the luminescence intensified, pulsing subtly. Amra's breath caught. "Fascinating," he murmured. His scientific curiosity seemed genuine, but something else colored his tone. Amra turned in his arms to face him, their faces now inches apart. "Your pupils are dilating," she observed, also a natural response to certain stimuli. Their eyes locked in the dim light, his steely blue meeting her luminous gold. Something electric passed between them. "This is unwise," Amra whispered, even as her hand moved to rest against his chest. "Completely," Ray agreed, not moving away. "We barely know each other." "True. We have different agendas." "Undoubtedly." Yet neither moved to create distance. Instead, as if pulled by some gravitational force neither could resist, they moved closer. Their lips met hesitantly at first, then with increasing urgency. Ray's hand slid to the small of her back, pressing her closer as Amra's fingers tangled in his hair. The kiss deepened, crossing the boundaries of species and caution. Amra's skin brightened in response, bathing them in soft violet light. Ray pulled back slightly, studying her face with undisguised wonder. "You're beautiful," he said simply. Something in his unguarded honesty broke through Amra's carefully maintained barriers. She kissed him again, more demanding this time. Her fingers found the hem of his thermal shirt, slipping beneath to explore the warm skin beneath. Ray responded in kind, his hands mapping the unfamiliar landscape of her body. Where his fingers traced her skin, the luminescent patterns followed like electricity, creating swirling pathways of light. Amra gasped as he discovered a particularly sensitive spot along her collarbone. "Does that hurt?" he asked, immediately concerned. "No," she breathed. "Quite the opposite." As clothing gave way to exploration, their differences in biology became apparent, yet somehow complementary. What began as tentative discovery evolved into something more primal, more urgent. In the cold desert night, they created a pocket of heat and light, their bodies moving together in an ancient rhythm that transcended species. Without warning, at the height of their passion, Amra's telepathic abilities surged, temporarily overwhelming the collar's suppression. Their minds connected in a flash of shared sensation, each feeling what the other experienced, creating a feedback loop of double pleasure. Ray gasped in shock at the sudden mental intimacy, his eyes widening. "What?" he began. "Don't fight it," Amra whispered against his lips. "Just feel." For a precious few moments they experienced each other completely, body and mind intertwined in a connection neither had previously imagined possible. When they finally collapsed together, breathing heavily, neither could speak. Ray recovered first, propping himself on one elbow to look down at Amra. Her skin glowed brighter than before, pulsing slowly with her heartbeat. That was... He struggled to find words adequate to the experience. "Unexpected," Amra finished for him, her voice soft. "The mental connection. A temporary failure in the collar's suppression matrix." She looked away, suddenly vulnerable. "I didn't intend it." Ray gently turned her face back toward his. "I'm not complaining." A moment of genuine connection passed between them, something neither had anticipated. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they retreated behind their respective walls of caution. "We should rest," Ray said, lying back. "Dawn comes quickly here." Amra settled against him, her head on his shoulder. "This changes nothing," she stated, though without conviction. "Absolutely nothing," Ray agreed, his arm tightening around her. They fell asleep wrapped together, both pretending that everything hadn't just changed completely. Dawn arrived with violence. The first explosion rocked the shelter, sending both of them tumbling from the sleeping platform. Ray recovered instantly, rolling to his feet in a defensive stance that spoke of military training. Amra was half a second behind him, the metal collar around her neck blinking rapidly. "They found us!" she gasped. Ray was already at the console, scanning displays that flashed urgent warnings. "Impossible! The shielding! The collar!" Amra realized with horror. "When my abilities surged, it must have transmitted a location ping." Ray's eyes met hers, understanding the implication of her words. Their moment of intimacy had compromised them. Neither spoke the accusation aloud. "No time to dwell on it now," Ray said, grabbing a weapons pack from a concealed compartment. "We have company." The scanner showed 6 distinct signatures surrounding the shelter, heavily armed bounty hunters rather than Imperial troops, judging by their disorganized approach pattern. "Is there another exit?" Amra asked, hastily dressing. "Emergency tunnel, under the floor panel." Ray tossed her a compact pulse pistol. "You know how to use this?" Amra checked the charge and safety with practiced hands. "I'm a princess, not a pacifist." Ray's eyebrow raised slightly, but he said nothing, continuing to arm himself with an efficiency that confirmed Amra's suspicions about his background. Definitely not just a prospector. Another blast hit the shelter, this one penetrating the outer shield. Warning lights flashed as the environmental systems failed. "They're using shield penetrators," Ray observed grimly. "Professional equipment." "The Empire pays well for royal fugitives," Amra replied. Ray released the hidden floor panel, revealing a narrow passage downward. "Ladies first?" "How gallant," Amra deadpanned, but dropped into the tunnel without hesitation. Ray followed, sealing the panel behind them just as the shelter's main door exploded inward. They crawled through the narrow passage as dust and debris rained down. After 50 meters, the tunnel opened into a larger cavern, part of an ancient tunnel system that predated human presence on Kedra. "These tunnels run for miles under the desert," Ray explained as they moved quickly through the darkness, guided by the light from Amra's still glowing skin. "Old mining operations, maybe, or some native species that died out." "How convenient that your shelter happened to connect to them," Amra remarked dryly. "I chose that location specifically," Ray admitted. "Always have an escape route." They navigated the labyrinthine passages for nearly an hour before the sounds of pursuit reached them. The bounty hunters had discovered the tunnel. "They're persistent," Ray muttered, checking his scanner, "and they've called for backup." Of course they have, Amra said bitterly. Half the galaxy wants me either dead or married off. They emerged into a vast underground chamber studded with crystal formations that amplified Amra's bioluminescence, casting eerie violet shadows across ancient stone carvings. "What is this place?" Ray asked, momentarily distracted by the scale of the chamber. "Remnants of Kedra's original civilization," Amra explained, running her fingers over inscriptions. "They built underground to escape the extreme temperatures." A blast from behind them shattered several crystal formations. Ray pushed Amra behind a stone column as energy bolts illuminated the chamber. 6 bounty hunters fanned out at the entrance, their features obscured by tactical helmets. "Surrender the princess," the leader called out. "The Empire pays the same for her dead or alive." "Charming friends you have," Ray muttered, checking his weapon. "Not my friends," Amra hissed, "and they won't take me alive. Dead princesses can't be forced into political marriages." Ray peered around the column, assessing their options. The bounty hunters had superior position and firepower. "I count 6, possibly more coming. We're outgunned." "So we run?" Amra suggested. "No." Ray's expression shifted, something cold and calculating replacing his usual sardonic demeanor. "We fight." Before Amra could question him, Ray rolled from cover and fired with astonishing precision. 2 bounty hunters fell before they could react. The others returned fire, forcing Ray back behind the column. "Stay here," he instructed. His voice changed, deeper, more commanding. "I can fight," Amra protested. "Not this kind of fight." Something in his tone brooked no argument. Ray closed his eyes briefly, his breathing pattern changing. When he opened them again, there was something different. His pupils contracted to pinpoints, then dilated fully, revealing a faint golden glow similar to Amra's own eyes. He moved with impossible speed, dodging energy blasts that should have incinerated him. His return fire was methodical, each shot finding a vulnerable spot in the hunter's armor. 3 more fell in rapid succession. The leader, realizing the tide had turned, aimed not at Ray but at the ceiling above Amra. The resulting blast sent massive crystal shards raining down. Amra dove aside, but a fragment caught her shoulder, slicing deep. She cried out in pain. Ray turned at the sound, distracted for a crucial second. The bounty hunter seized the opportunity, firing directly at Ray's chest. The blast hit him squarely, knocking him backward against a stone column. Amra screamed, certain she'd just witnessed Ray's death. But instead of falling, he straightened slowly, looking down at the smoking hole in his jacket. Beneath the charred fabric, something glowed, an intricate pattern of golden light spreading across his skin like circuitry. The golden light beneath Ray's skin pulsed, spreading in geometric patterns across his chest and up his neck. The bounty hunter fired again and again, each blast absorbed by the growing network of light. "What the hell are you?" the hunter growled, backing away. Ray didn't answer. His eyes now glowed fully gold, pupils completely dilated. When he moved, the air around him seemed to ripple as if reality itself struggled to account for his speed. For Ray, the world slowed to a crawl. He perceived everything with hyperclarity, the trajectory of each energy blast, the micro-expressions of fear on the hunter's face, the slowly expanding cloud of dust particles hanging in the air. Information flooded his consciousness: threat assessments, physiological weaknesses, optimal attack vectors, all processed instantly by something ancient awakening within him. "Osiris Combat Protocol activated," a voice that wasn't his own announced inside his mind. "Threat neutralization initiated." Ray watched himself move as if from a distance, his body operating with mechanical precision. He closed the distance to the remaining hunter before the man could squeeze his trigger again. One strike to disable the weapon, another to collapse the knee joint. A third to render unconscious, efficient, clinical, perfect. The entire encounter lasted less than 4 seconds. Amra stared, transfixed by the display. The human she'd thought she understood had transformed into something else entirely, something both terrifying and magnificent. The golden circuitry patterns beneath his skin mirrored her own bioluminescence, yet carried an artificial precision that spoke of advanced technology far beyond anything she'd encountered. Ray stood motionless over the fallen hunter, his back to Amra, shoulders rising and falling with controlled breaths. The golden light began to recede, pulling back into his core like a tide returning to sea. "Ray?" Amra called softly, clutching her wounded shoulder. He turned slowly, his eyes still glowing but dimming gradually. Recognition replaced the machine-like focus as he saw her injury. "You're hurt." His voice sounded strange, doubled, as if two beings spoke through one throat. "I'll live." Amra stepped closer cautiously. "But you... what just happened?" Ray looked down at his hands where the last traces of golden light faded beneath his skin. "I don't know. Not exactly." He winced suddenly, pressing his palm against his temple. "It's never activated like that before." He staggered, equilibrium failing. Amra rushed forward, catching him before he collapsed completely. Together, they stumbled deeper into the cavern, away from the fallen hunters. "We need to find somewhere safe," Amra said, supporting his increasingly heavy weight. "Can you walk?" Ray nodded grimly, though each step seemed to cost him. "That passage," he indicated a narrow opening partially hidden behind crystal formations, "leads deeper, should be defensible." They navigated the passage, emerging into a smaller chamber lit by phosphorescent fungi growing along the walls. Ancient stone benches suggested this had once been some kind of meeting place. Amra eased Ray onto a bench and examined him with concern. "What's happening to you?" Ray's breathing had stabilized, but sweat beaded on his forehead despite the chamber's coolness. "System overload. The implant wasn't meant to fully activate yet." "Implant?" Amra pressed her hand against his chest where the energy blast had struck. The fabric had burned away, revealing smooth skin marked with faint golden lines like circuitry, dormant now but unmistakable. "Osiris," Ray confirmed, his voice stronger but edged with pain. "Organic synthetic integration reactive intelligence system, military enhancement prototype." "You're a soldier?" Amra applied pressure to her own wound, using strips torn from her clothing to bind it. Ray laughed weakly. "Not exactly. More like an experiment that escaped the lab." He leaned back against the stone wall, gathering strength before continuing. "I was 17 when they recruited me. Orphan, nothing to lose. They promised education, purpose, a future. Failed to mention they'd be replacing half my skeletal structure with synthetic composites and implanting an AI combat system in my central nervous system." "Your government did this to you?" Amra asked, horror creeping into her voice. "Not the government. Private military contractor, black budget operation." Ray's expression darkened with the memory. 20 volunteers. I was the only survivor of the integration process." Amra sat beside him, processing this revelation. "So you ran?" "Before final programming was complete." Ray nodded. "The Osiris system was only partially activated. Self-defense subroutines, enhanced reflexes, accelerated healing. The full combat protocols were supposed to come later, after they were certain I was compliant." "And today, what triggered the full activation?" Ray's eyes met hers. "You." "Me?" "The system registered your injury as a critical threat to a protected asset." Ray looked away, uncomfortable with the implication. Amra processed this. "And now?" Now I've got an ancient military AI waking up inside me, integrating with my nervous system. He rubbed his temples. And it's got opinions about everything from tactical decisions to my caffeine intake. Despite the gravity of the situation, Amra felt laughter bubble up. So you have a voice in your head criticizing your life choices? Something like that? Ray's mouth quirked in a half smile. Though right now it's mostly calculating the statistical probability of our survival. He paused. It's not optimistic. Amra's laughter faded. Those hunters were just the beginning. More will come. Then perhaps it's time you told me exactly who you are and why an entire empire wants you either wedded or dead. Amra stared at the glowing fungi, gathering her thoughts. Finally, she straightened her posture, assuming a dignity that transcended her tattered clothing and wounded shoulder. I am Amra Lys, Crown Princess of the Eternal Flame Dynasty, direct descendant of the Scion Empress, and rightful heir to the Seven Systems. She spoke formally, as if making a court declaration. And I have been sentenced to death for refusing to participate in the rite of dynastic union. Ray's eyebrows rose. Impressive titles, but I need the translation. Amra sighed, dropping the formal tone. My civilization has maintained peace for millennia through a system of arranged marriages. Royal bloodlines are bound together through carefully negotiated unions that balance power and resources. Political marriages, Ray summarized, not exactly unique to your species. These aren't just political. Amra touched the collar around her neck. Our telepathic abilities make these unions permanent in ways humans can't imagine. Once bonded, the royal pairs share one mind, one will, directed, of course, by the stronger partner. Understanding dawned on Ray's face, and they chose a partner who would dominate you. Supreme General Karzek. Amra practically spat the name, a military commander with telepathic abilities nearly as strong as mine, but with none of my ethical concerns about using them. So you ran. I did more than run. I publicly denounced the system, exposed its abuses, revealed how the joining process has been corrupted to silence dissenting voices. Her eyes flashed with defiance. I sparked a movement, especially among younger royals facing their own forced unions. Which made you dangerous, Ray concluded. Exactly. Too popular to simply eliminate, too valuable as a bloodline carrier to let go. So they staged a public trial, sentenced me to exile, and arranged a very visible execution that would mysteriously fail to produce a body. The burial in the desert was theater. Amra nodded. The drone judge was programmed to excavate me once witnesses departed. Karzek's forces would retrieve me, declare me rehabilitated through meditation and hardship, and force the union before anyone realized what happened. Ray whistled low. Elaborate. Imperial politics usually are. She touched her wounded shoulder gingerly. But now I've gone properly missing, and Karzek can't admit his plan failed without revealing his deception. So he sent bounty hunters instead of official forces, Ray reasoned, maintaining plausible deniability. For now, but if I don't act quickly, he'll consolidate power in my absence. My supporters will be silenced. The reforms I fought for will die. Amra stood, pacing the small chamber. I need to return with proof of his plot and reclaim my position. And what proof would that be? The ancestral sigil, a genetic key stored in the old palace ruins on the far side of the desert. With it, I can access the Imperial archives, retrieve the evidence I hid before my capture, and present it to the Council of Equals. Ray remained silent for a long moment, processing everything. Finally, he spoke. That's quite a mission for someone who was buried in sand yesterday. I never asked for your help, Amra replied defensively. No, you didn't. Ray stood, testing his stability. The Osiris activation had left him drained but functional. "But you've got it anyway." Amra studied his face. "Why would you risk your life for my political crusade?" I'd been asking myself the same question. Ray stepped closer to her. "I've spent years hiding, surviving, keeping my head down, boring but safe. And now? Now I've got an ancient AI telling me our survival chances are better together than apart, and—" He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "Last night changed things." "We agreed it changed nothing," Amra reminded him, though without conviction. "We lied." Ray shrugged. "I've been alone a long time. Never risked connecting with anyone because of what I am, what's inside me. And now I've met someone who glows like I do, who has voices in her head too, in a way." His expression softened slightly. "Who showed me what it feels like to be truly connected, if only for a moment." Amra wanted to dismiss his words as sentimentality, yet couldn't. The connection they'd shared had been profound beyond physical pleasure, a glimpse of something she hadn't known was possible. "I would have continued drilling sand and eating lizards by the fire," Ray said quietly. "But you, with your eyes and your arrogant mouth, ruined everything." A smile tugged at Amra's lips despite herself. "You make helping me sound like a terrible inconvenience." "The worst," Ray agreed, his own smile emerging briefly. "But I'm in." Amra stepped forward and pressed her hand against his chest, where the Osiris implant lay dormant beneath his skin. His hand covered hers, warm and solid. "The palace ruins are 5 days' journey across the worst part of the desert," she warned. "Karzek's forces will be hunting us every step. Then we'd better start walking." Ray gathered their remaining supplies, "unless you'd prefer to be mentally shackled to a megalomaniacal general for eternity." "When you put it that way." Amra straightened, royal determination replacing vulnerability. "We leave now. Together." They exited the chamber through a passage leading deeper into the ancient tunnel system. Above them, Imperial forces converged on the bounty hunter's last known location. Below, they navigated by the light of Amra's bioluminescence, hands occasionally brushing in the darkness. Neither spoke of the connection they'd shared, nor of the one still forming. But as they ventured deeper beneath Kedra's surface, something shifted between them. Trust growing in the most unlikely soil, blooming like the rare desert flowers that emerged after storms. The second night found them in a vast underground chamber where an ancient river had once flowed. Now crystal formations studded the ceiling like stars, reflecting the gentle glow of Amra's skin. Their telepathic connection had strengthened since that first accidental contact, allowing brief moments of shared consciousness that both frightened and fascinated them. Under the crystal stars of the underground cavern, they came together again, this time with full awareness of what they were sharing. As their bodies joined, Amra deliberately lowered her mental barriers, and Ray surrendered to the connection. Their minds intertwined as intimately as their bodies, each experiencing the other's pleasure, fear, hope, and doubt. In that perfect unity, something unprecedented occurred. The Osiris implant synchronized with Amra's telepathic abilities, creating a feedback loop that enhanced both. For a timeless moment, they existed as something greater than either alone, neither fully organic nor synthetic, neither human nor alien, but something entirely new. When they finally separated, both knew they had crossed a point of no return. Whatever awaited them at the ruined palace, they would face it not as reluctant allies, but as something without name or precedent in either of their cultures. "What happens after?" Ray asked as they lay side by side, watching crystal reflections dance across the cavern walls. "If we succeed." Amra's fingers traced the now invisible pathways of the Osiris implant beneath his skin. "I become Empress, reform the system, end forced unions." And what place does a human science experiment have in an alien imperial court? She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him seriously. Whatever place he chooses. Ray didn't answer, but his hand found hers in the semi-darkness, fingers interlacing. Tomorrow would bring dangers neither could fully anticipate. But tonight, in the depths of Kedra's ancient passages, they had found something neither had been looking for, and neither was willing to relinquish. 5 days of traversing Kedra's treacherous underground labyrinth had taken its toll. Ray's enhanced physiology handled the strain better than most humans would have, but even he felt the effects of limited food, recycled water, and the constant vigilance required to evade Imperial search parties. The Osiris implant remained dormant, healing itself after the unexpected activation, occasionally sending diagnostic warnings through his neural pathways. Amra led them through passages that grew increasingly ornate, testament to the ancient civilization that had once thrived beneath Kedra's inhospitable surface. Carvings depicted beings similar to Amra's species, but with subtle differences that spoke of evolutionary divergence. "Your ancestors?" Ray asked, tracing a particularly intricate relief showing violet-skinned figures manipulating light with their hands. "Distant cousins," Amra corrected. "The Luminari. They colonized Kedra millennia before my people achieved space travel. When the climate shifted, they adapted by moving underground rather than abandoning the planet." "What happened to them?" Amra's expression darkened. "Official Imperial history claims they died out naturally. The truth?" She ran her fingers over the carved figures. "They developed telepathic abilities too powerful for the Empire to control, so they were systematically eliminated. Ray absorbed this information. And you carry their genetics. Many royal bloodlines do. The Empire preserves what it fears, then weaponizes it." She turned to face him, her golden eyes glowing in the dim light. "Just as your creators did with Osiris." The parallel wasn't lost on Ray. Two species, separated by light years in biology, following the same pattern of exploitation and control. "How much farther to the palace?" "We should reach the ancient access tunnel by nightfall." Amra pointed toward a distant archway. "From there, it's a direct path to the palace sublevels." As they continued, Ray noticed Amra moving with increasing grace despite their harsh conditions. Her wounds had healed with remarkable speed, and she showed no signs of fatigue. "Your recovery rate isn't standard for your species, is it?" he finally asked. Amra hesitated before answering. "No, it's a function of the telepathic core." "The what?" She touched the center of her chest. "During the final phase of royal genetic optimization, we receive an implant, a crystalline matrix that amplifies telepathic abilities and interfaces with our nervous system." "Sounds familiar," Ray commented dryly, thinking of his own implant. "Similar concept, different application." Amra continued walking. "The core regulates cellular degradation. Essentially, it prevents aging once we reach physical maturity." Ray halted mid-step. "You're immortal?" "Hardly." A bitter laugh escaped her. "We can be killed. Disease, trauma, catastrophic injury, all still effective. We simply don't die of old age." "How old are you?" The question slipped out before Ray could consider its implications. Amra studied him with amusement. "Would you ask a human woman that question?" "Probably not if I wanted to keep all my limbs." "Wise policy." She smiled enigmatically. "I've seen 93 solar cycles. Young by royal standards." Ray processed this new information. Nearly a century of life, packaged in a body that appeared no older than his own. "Does it bother you, watching others age and die?" "Would it bother you?" Amra countered. Ray considered the question seriously. "Yes," he finally admitted. "Watching everyone you connect with wither while you remain unchanged. That's its own kind of prison." Something shifted in Amra's expression. surprise, perhaps, at his insight. That's why royals typically only form attachments with other royals. It's less complicated. Is that the official reason for the arranged marriages? Compatibility of lifespan? One of many justifications for a system designed to consolidate power. Amra's voice hardened. But even an eternity is too high a price for mental subjugation. They walked in silence for several minutes before Ray spoke again. The Osiris implant. It's altering my cellular structure. I've been monitoring the changes since activation. Amra glanced at him sharply. What kind of changes? Enhanced tissue regeneration, accelerated neural processing, and, he hesitated, significantly reduced cellular decay. Understanding dawned in Amra's eyes. It's extending your lifespan. Osiris was designed to create the perfect soldier. Longevity would be a tactical advantage. Ray's expression remained neutral, but his mind raced with implications he'd been avoiding. Amra didn't press further. Instead, she reached for his hand in a rare gesture of physical contact outside their moments of intimacy. Their fingers intertwined briefly before practical necessity forced them to separate and continue their journey. Neither spoke of what this might mean for their future. Both understood the significance without needing to verbalize it. The palace ruins emerged from the desert like the skeleton of a massive beast. Black columns of volcanic stone, once polished to mirror sheen, now stood cracked and wind-eroded against Kedra's violet sky. Massive doorways gaped empty, their ornate doors long since looted or decayed. What had once been the center of Luminari civilization now served as little more than a landmark for desert travelers. Ray and Amra emerged from the underground tunnel as the smallest sunset, casting long shadows across the ruins. They crouched behind a fallen column, surveying the area for signs of Imperial forces. "I don't like it," Ray muttered, scanning with enhanced vision. "Too quiet." "The ancestral sigil chamber is beneath the central dome." Amra pointed toward a partially collapsed structure that had once been the palace's main hall. "We need to find the access point." "And you're sure this genetic key is still there, after all this time?" "The chamber is protected by security systems that have outlasted civilizations." Amira checked her weapon's charge. "No one can access it without compatible royal blood, and even then, only under specific conditions, such as the claimant must be of direct imperial lineage, telepathically viable, and," she paused, "pure of intention." Ray raised an eyebrow. "That last one seems subjective for a security system." "Telepathic technology often is. The system reads your genuine motivations, not just the ones you present." Amra's expression grew serious. "That's why Karzek can't retrieve the sigil himself, despite having partial genetic compatibility. His intentions would register as corrupted. And yours won't." Amra met his gaze steadily. "We're about to find out." They moved through the ruins with practiced stealth, navigating fallen debris and avoiding open spaces. The palace complex stretched for nearly a mile in each direction, a labyrinth of collapsed corridors and exposed chambers. As they approached the central dome, Ray's implant sent a warning pulse through his system. "We're not alone," he whispered, pulling Amra into a shadowed alcove. As if confirming his words, a patrol of Imperial soldiers in full tactical gear emerged from behind a distant column. Their armor, black with purple insignia, identified them as members of the Imperial Elite Guard. "Karzek's personal unit," Amra hissed. "They're already here." Ray counted 12 soldiers moving in standard search formation. "They haven't secured the central dome yet. They're still looking for the access point. We need to move fast. Once night falls completely, they'll deploy thermal imaging." Using the deepening shadows as cover, they skirted the patrol, ducking from one ruined structure to another. Twice they froze as search drones passed overhead, their sensors sweeping the ground in methodical patterns. The central dome loomed before them, its once perfect curve now partially collapsed. Within the structure, Imperial soldiers had established a command post, their equipment casting harsh white light against ancient walls. "The access point is behind the throne platform," Amra whispered, indicating a raised dais visible through a gap in the wall. "But we'll never reach it with that many guards." Ray studied the scene, the Osiris implant automatically calculating angles and vulnerabilities. "We need a diversion." Using components from their remaining equipment, Ray constructed a series of small explosive charges. "Nothing lethal," he explained, "but they'll create enough noise and light to draw attention." "Where did a mineral prospector learn demolitions?" Amra teased. "Summer camp," Ray deadpanned. They placed the charges at strategic points around the perimeter, timed to detonate in sequence. When the first explosion hit, Imperial forces reacted predictably, deploying to investigate the disturbance. As subsequent blasts drew more soldiers away from the command post, Ray and Amra slipped inside through an unguarded maintenance passage. The throne room's grandeur remained evident despite centuries of decay. Massive arches supported what remained of the dome, their surfaces carved with intricate histories of a civilization long extinct. The throne itself, a masterpiece of black stone and crystal, stood intact on its raised platform. "Behind the throne," Amra directed, moving swiftly across the open space. Ray followed, keeping watch for returning soldiers. "How exactly do we access this chamber?" "Like this." Amra placed her palm against a seemingly ordinary section of the platform. Her skin began to glow more intensely, the pattern shifting to match hidden markings in the stone. The platform shuddered, ancient mechanisms grinding to life. A section of floor slid away, revealing a spiraling staircase descending into darkness. "After you, Princess," Ray gestured with mock formality. The passage led them into a perfectly preserved chamber untouched by time or looters. Unlike the ruins above, this room remained as it had been thousands of years earlier, walls of polished black stone inlaid with luminescent crystal that responded to Amra's presence, brightening as she entered. At the chamber's center stood a pedestal of the same black stone, topped with a crystal formation that pulsed with internal light. The ancestral sigil, shaped like a complex geometric pattern, floated within the crystal, suspended in its matrix. "There it is," Amra breathed, approaching reverently. "The genetic key to the Imperial archives." "How do you activate it?" Ray asked, studying the room for potential threats or traps. "I must be recognized as a legitimate claimant." Amra stood before the pedestal, squaring her shoulders. "The system will scan my genetic profile and telepathic signature." She placed both hands on the crystal. Immediately, the light within intensified, bathing her in a violet glow that matched her skin. The patterns of her bioluminescence responded, creating complex synchronization patterns with the crystal's internal light. For several long moments, nothing else happened. Then the crystal began to pulse more rapidly, its light shifting from violet to gold, the same gold as Amra's eyes. The sigil within began to rotate, aligning itself into new configurations. "It's working," Amra whispered. "It's accepting my claim." The moment of triumph shattered as an amplified voice echoed through the chamber. "How predictable you remain, Princess." Amra jerked her hands away from the crystal, spinning toward the chamber entrance. Supreme General Karzek stood in the doorway, flanked by elite guards. Tall and imposing, his violet skin darker than Amra's and marked with military achievement patterns, he radiated cold authority. "Karzek." Amra's voice held steady despite the shock. "Always arriving uninvited." The general stepped into the chamber, his tactical armor gleaming in the crystal light. "Did you truly believe I wouldn't anticipate your plan? That I wouldn't monitor this site from the moment of your disappearance?" Ray shifted position subtly, placing himself between Amra and the new threat. The Osiris implant sent readiness signals through his system, but he suppressed full activation, aware that revealing his capabilities too soon would eliminate their tactical advantage. "Your plan failed, Karzek," Amra stated coldly. "The sigil has recognized my claim. The archives will open to me, not you. A temporary inconvenience." Karzek smiled without warmth. "Once our union is complete, your access becomes mine, as does everything else that is yours." His gaze shifted to Ray, assessing the human with clinical detachment. "I see you've acquired a pet during your exile. How quaint." Ray's expression remained neutral, though internally the Osiris system categorized Karzek's vulnerabilities with mechanical precision. "She's not going anywhere with you," he stated flatly. Karzek laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally in the ancient chamber. "You've brought a human to challenge me. Your time in exile has affected your judgment, Princess." "He's more than human," Amra replied, her hand moving to the crystal sigil, which had detached from its matrix and now hovered near her. "And I am more than your political accessory." The general's amusement vanished. "Guards, secure the princess. Eliminate the human." Elite guards moved with practiced efficiency, weapons trained on Ray. Before they could fire, the chamber's entrance suddenly sealed itself, ancient defensive protocols activated by the sigil's release. "What have you done?" Karzek demanded, his composure cracking. "I didn't come for the sigil alone," Amra revealed, closing her hand around the floating crystal. "I came to trigger the palace's self-destruct sequence." The chamber shuddered as ancient machinery awakened throughout the ruins. Dust rained from the ceiling as the ground beneath them trembled. "You'll kill us all!" Karzek snarled, genuine fear breaking through his controlled exterior. "No," Amra contradicted, pressing the sigil against her chest where it merged with her telepathic core. "Only those who fail the judgment." The chamber's crystal illumination shifted, focusing into intense beams that swept across everyone present. Ray felt the light pass through him, analyzing something beyond physical parameters. Intention, perhaps, or moral alignment. Karzek screamed as the light touched him, his body contorting as if under attack. The elite guards suffered similar reactions, some collapsing instantly, others fighting against an invisible force. "What's happening to them?" Ray asked, unaffected by the light himself. "The Luminari built this chamber as their last defense," Amra explained, her voice echoing with new power as the sigil's energy flowed through her. "Those who come with conquest or subjugation in their hearts cannot withstand its judgment." The palace continued to shake, sections collapsing above them. "We need to move," Ray urged. "This place is coming apart." "There's an emergency exit." Amra gestured toward a far wall where crystalline patterns formed an archway. "It will take us to the surface." Karzek, still writhing under the chamber's judgment, managed to rasp out a command to his guards. Two of them, fighting through their pain, raised weapons toward Amra. Ray moved without conscious thought, the Osiris implant engaging partial combat protocols. He disarmed both guards with precise strikes, their weapons clattering uselessly to the floor. "We need to go. Now." He pulled Amra toward the exit as the chamber continued to shake apart around them. Amra pressed her hand against the crystal archway, activating the ancient mechanism. The wall shimmered and dissolved, revealing a steep passage upward. They entered as the chamber behind them began to collapse, burying Karzek and his guards beneath tons of ancient stone. The escape tunnel twisted upward through the palace foundations, periodically blocked by fallen debris they had to climb over or squeeze past. Twice they nearly turned back as the path ahead seemed impassable, but each time Amra's connection to the sigil revealed alternative routes. The sigil is interfacing with the palace systems, she explained as they navigated a particularly narrow passage. It's guiding us out. After what felt like hours of climbing, they emerged onto a high platform near what had once been the palace's central spire. From this vantage point, they could see the full extent of the destruction, the ancient structure dissolving into dust and rubble as millennium-old self-destruct protocols executed their final commands. "We can't stay here," Ray warned, scanning the horizon. "The platform is unstable." But as they searched for a path downward, a new threat materialized. Rising from behind distant dunes, a fleet of Imperial warships approached, sleek, predatory craft designed for atmospheric and space combat. Dozens of smaller tactical vessels deployed from the larger ships, surrounding the palace ruins in an inescapable net. "The Supreme Regent," Amra breathed, recognizing the insignia on the lead vessel. Karzek's master. A massive ship, twice the size of the others, descended toward their position. Its hull gleamed with the distinctive black-purple alloy reserved for highest Imperial authority. "Who exactly is the Supreme Regent?" Ray asked, counting enemy vessels and calculating their diminishing odds of escape. "Karzek's patron, the real power behind the forced union scheme." Amra's expression hardened. "My uncle." Before Ray could respond, a holographic projection materialized before them, a tall, aristocratic figure whose resemblance to Amra was unmistakable despite his more severe features and ornate military dress. "Niece," the projection acknowledged with cold formality, "your defiance continues to inconvenience the Empire." "Uncle," Amra matched his tone, "your corruption continues to destroy it." The regent's expression remained impassive. "The palace ruins have sentimental value, but they're ultimately replaceable. You, however, still possess genetic value to our bloodline." "I'm not a breeding asset," Amra spat. "Everything and everyone serves the Empire in their capacity." The regent's gaze shifted to Ray. "Even alien specimens can be studied for potential utility." Ray felt the Osiris implant stirring, responding to the escalating threat level. Golden circuitry patterns began to glow faintly beneath his skin. The regent noticed the change. "Interesting modifications for a human, perhaps more valuable than I initially assessed." "Last chance, Amra," the regent continued. "Surrender the sigil, submit to Imperial authority, and your human pet might be allowed to live. Resist, and watch as I reduce this entire site to atoms." To emphasize his point, weapon systems on all surrounding vessels powered up simultaneously, their targeting systems locked on the platform where Ray and Amra stood. Ray scanned their surroundings one final time, the Osiris implant analyzing and discarding escape scenarios with cold efficiency. There were no viable options, no tactical retreat, no path to safety. He looked at Amra, then down at his hands where golden light pulsed beneath the skin, growing stronger with each heartbeat. "I'm not a hero," he said quietly. "Never have been." He met her eyes. "But today, I guess I'll have to become one." Before Amra could respond, Ray closed his eyes and mentally disengaged all the safeguards he'd maintained on the Osiris system. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Golden light erupted from beneath his skin, tracing the implant's circuitry throughout his body. His eyes snapped open, now glowing with the same intense gold as the Osiris system fully activated for the first time since its creation. "Osiris combat protocols fully engaged," announced a voice that was Ray's, yet somehow more than his. "Threat assessment complete. Neutralization authorized." Ray's perception of time altered dramatically. The world around him slowed to a crawl, the regent's expression frozen in mid-shift from arrogance to concern, Amra's hand reaching toward him, moving through air thick as syrup, the energy weapons of the Imperial fleet charging with painful lethargy. He moved with impossible speed, each motion guided by combat algorithms refined through centuries of warfare. The Osiris system had been designed as the ultimate weapon, not just enhanced reflexes and strength, but the ability to manipulate energy fields at the subatomic level. Ray extended his hands toward the nearest vessels. Golden energy coalesced around his fingers before lancing outward in blinding arcs. Where the energy struck, Imperial ships simply disintegrated, not exploding so much as unraveling at the molecular level, reduced to constituent particles that scattered in the desert wind. The Imperial fleet responded with concentrated fire, but Ray moved faster than their targeting systems could track. He redirected their energy weapons back upon themselves, creating chain reactions that spread destruction through their formations. Aboard the Regent's vessel, panic replaced disciplined order. Amra watched in awe as her uncle's impenetrable fleet dissolved into chaos, vessels either fleeing or falling to Ray's onslaught. The Regent himself abandoned dignity for survival, his hologram disappearing as his flagship attempted retreat. But Ray, operating now as something beyond human, tracked the vessel with pristine accuracy. With a gesture that seemed to bend space itself, he reached across the intervening distance and seized control of the ship's systems. The flagship froze mid-air, held immobile by forces its engineers had never anticipated. Ray's voice, amplified and resonant with power, addressed the Regent directly. "You will face Imperial justice," he pronounced, "not as its administrator, but as its subject." With another gesture, he forced the ship's descent, bringing it to rest at the edge of the palace ruins. Imperial guards fled in terror as Ray approached, golden energy cascading from his form with each step. Only the Regent maintained his composure, emerging from his vessel with head held high despite his defeat. "What manner of weapon are you?" he demanded. Before Ray could answer, Amra stepped forward. The ancestral sigil glowed at her throat, its power amplifying her natural telepathic abilities. She placed her hand against her uncle's forehead. "You wanted mental dominance," she said softly. "Experience it firsthand." The Regent's eyes widened as Amra's telepathic assault overwhelmed his defenses. He collapsed to his knees, his body rigid as decades of crimes and conspiracies were forcibly extracted from his mind. "The evidence I need," Amra stated, removing her hand. "Every plot, every manipulation, every killing ordered in service to your ambition, all recorded by the sigil for presentation to the Council of Equals." The Regent remained kneeling, his mind temporarily paralyzed by the invasive telepathic procedure. Around them, the remaining Imperial forces, witnessing their leader's defeat, began surrendering to the authority of the royal sigil Amra now wielded. Victory secured, Amra turned to Ray and froze in horror. The full activation of Osiris had extracted a terrible price. Ray stood swaying, golden light now flickering erratically beneath his skin. Blood trickled from his nose and ears as the system overtaxed his human physiology. "Ray!" She rushed to him as he collapsed to his knees, his body smoking from the energy that had coursed through it. The golden glow in his eyes flickered, revealing glimpses of his natural blue before being subsumed again by Osiris. His skin burned hot to the touch as the implant circuitry pulsed with destabilizing energy. "System overload," he managed through gritted teeth. "Can't contain it much longer." Amra cradled his face in her hands, her own telepathic ability seeking connection with his mind. What she found terrified her. The Osiris AI was consuming Ray's consciousness, burning through neural pathways as it struggled to maintain combat functionality despite his body's failure. "Fight it," she commanded, pressing her forehead to his. "Don't let it take you." Ray's eyes locked with hers, a moment of clarity breaking through the chaos. "Worth it," he whispered. "For you. For freedom." The sigil at Amra's throat pulsed in response to her distress. Suddenly understanding its purpose, she removed the crystal and pressed it against Ray's chest where the Osiris implant's core node resided. "Synchronize," she commanded both systems. "Balance. Equilibrium." The sigil responded to her royal command, extending crystalline filaments into Ray's body. Where Osiris burned with destructive energy, the sigil's ancient technology absorbed and redistributed the overload. Golden light intermingled with violet as the two systems, one designed for war, one for preservation, achieved unexpected harmony. Ray gasped as the burning pain subsided. The golden glow in his eyes dimmed but didn't extinguish completely, settling into a balanced state that reflected both the Osiris technology and his own humanity. The sun set over Kedra's desert, casting long shadows across the ruined palace. Against this backdrop of destruction and ancient grandeur, Amra knelt beside Ray. Her royal garments, regenerated by the sigil's power, contrasted with his battle-worn appearance. The crystal, now fused with his Osiris implant, gleamed at his chest, a visible symbol of their unprecedented connection. Amra took his face in her hands. "You said you were just passing by," she said softly. "But Ray Archer, I think the universe itself sent you to me." Despite the pain still etched in his features, a smile tugged at his lips. And the universe said, "Stop wandering around. Find yourself a purple-skinned wife with attitude." She laughed, the sound bright against the settling dust of battle, and helped him to his feet. Around them, the remaining imperial forces awaited direction from their new leader, the princess who had defied tradition and returned with both the ancestral sigil and irrefutable evidence of corruption in the highest ranks. Epilogue. 1 year later, the imperial capital gleamed under the light of twin moons. The ancient city had transformed under Queen Amra's leadership, traditional architectural elements now integrated with technologies from a dozen alien civilizations, including human designs. In the royal residence, high above the bustling metropolis, Amra and Ray stood on a private balcony overlooking gardens that blended Kedran flora with specimens from Earth. The reforms had begun slowly but gained momentum, forced unions abolished, trade routes opened to previously excluded species, telepathic technologies regulated to prevent abuse. Ray, officially designated as royal consort and supreme strategist, retained his essential character despite his elevated position. He still preferred his worn jacket to formal robes, still made sarcastic comments during state functions, and still kept a weapon within reach at all times, old habits of a man who had spent too long as a fugitive. The integration of the sigil with his Osiris implant had stabilized both systems, granting him control over abilities that had once threatened to consume him. His eyes, now permanently tinted with gold, were the most visible reminder of his transformation. On the balcony, their bodies intertwined beneath Kedra's stars, they created a sight almost mystical in its beauty. His tanned skin against her violet tones, soft light emanating where they touched. The telepathic bond between them had deepened over months of practice, allowing them to share not just sensations but memories, dreams, hopes. "The council session went well today," Amra murmured against his shoulder afterward. "The trade agreement with Earth passed unanimously." "Amazing what revealing decades of corruption will do for political cooperation," Ray replied, tracing patterns on her luminescent skin. "Though I think some counselors are still terrified I'll disintegrate them if they vote against you." "A useful misconception." Amra smiled. "Let's not correct them quite yet." The anniversary of their first meeting approached, and as had become their private tradition, Amra ceremoniously buried Rey in sand up to his neck on the palace grounds, a playful reenactment of their first encounter. He escaped easily, tackling her into the sand and kissing her thoroughly, while palace staff pretended not to notice their monarch engaging in such undignified behavior. What had begun as tragedy had become celebration, the foundation of a partnership unprecedented in imperial history. But beneath the surface of their hard-won peace, new threats gathered. In Rey's private laboratory, diagnostic equipment monitored the ongoing evolution of the Osiris implant, now altering his genetic architecture in ways neither human nor Kedron scientists fully understood. Each cell in his body gradually transformed into something neither fully organic nor synthetic, but a new hybridization with unknown potential. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the corporation that had created Osiris had tracked their missing prototype to Kedra. Military vessels assembled at the edge of Imperial space, officially designated as recovery specialists, but armed for planetary assault if necessary. The corporation's directive was clear: retrieve the Osiris technology at any cost. The human host was irrelevant. The alien civilization harboring him was expendable. In the royal bedchamber, as Rey and Amra slept entwined, both the Osiris implant and the ancestral sigil pulsed in synchronized warning, ancient systems sensing distant danger approaching their carriers. The next chapter of their journey was beginning, one that would test not just their power but the unprecedented bond between human and Kedron, between synthetic and organic, between two beings who had found in each other something worth fighting an empire to preserve. Rey's arm tightened protectively around Amra in his sleep, the Osiris system already calculating defense scenarios. Amra's telepathic abilities stretched outward, unconsciously scanning for approaching threats. Together, they represented something neither of their species had anticipated: an evolutionary leap forward that powerful forces would either seek to control or destroy. The desert winds of Kedra whispered across the capital, carrying ancient dust from the palace ruins where their story had reached its first climax. But endings, as both had learned, were often merely disguised beginnings, and their beginning had started in the most unlikely of ways, with a princess buried in sand and a wanderer who had simply been passing by, until the universe intervened.